In a last-minute ditch to forestall an invasion, Ukraine has called for a meeting with Russia and other members of a key European security group over the escalating tensions on its border. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said on Monday that Russia had ignored formal requests to explain the buildup of troops. He said the next step was requesting a meeting within the next 48 hours for transparency about Russia's plans. Russia has denied any plans to invade Ukraine, despite the buildup of some 100,000 soldiers on Ukraine's borders. But with the U.S. saying Moscow could begin an aerial bombardment at any time, more than a dozen nations have urged their citizens to leave Ukraine. Similarly, some airlines have suspended flights to the beleaguered Eastern European country. Russia, however, is contending that its buildup of troops along the Ukraine border is its own concern within its own territory. On Sunday, senior foreign policy official Yuri Ushakov characterized the U.S. warning of an imminent invasion as hysteria that has reached its peak. Now joining us to discuss the escalating Russia-Ukraine crisis and what Nigeria and other African countries should be doing to ensure that their citizens do not get caught in the crossfire between Russia and the West is Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, a foreign policy wonk and former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Welcome to the show, sir, and good morning. Lovely to see you.
Good morning, Prof.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning, Ms. Abiola. Well, and what's happened to my friend?
Oh, Rufai. He's on leave at the moment. He'll be back shortly.
Yes.
Sir.
Well, Prof.
Oh, all right.
First, let me start by thanking you for the other day. We enjoyed the implications very
Don't
much.
start again.
Anyway, Tino has already given a detailed introductions. Just for me to ask, what's your take on the Russian-Ukraine crisis and its impact on the global relations? And secondly, 12 countries have evacuated their citizens or offered their advice that their citizens should leave. The latest being India a few hours ago this morning. Now, shouldn't Nigeria also be talking about evacuating Nigerian students, many of whom are in Ukraine, in the face of this tension?
Well, thank you for those questions. You know, I've been, it's not a question of blowing one's trumpet, but I've been a foreign policy scholar for 62 years now. And believe me, I don't think I've come across any issue that has left me baffled and bewildered. If I say I understand what is going on in Ukraine, I'm really just putting up a front. What the devil is going on? Is this all about Ukraine? Is this about competition between Russia and the United States? Is this a competition for domination of Europe? What's going on? The Americans are blowing the trumpet of war at the peak. And the president of Ukraine says, calm down. Now, he's supposed to be the victim. He says, calm down. Russia says, we are still in our territory. We haven't gone across the border. Although in international law, you don't really need to cross the border. You could take threatening steps and be in contravention of international law and international norms. Therefore, I will start off by answering the easiest question that you've asked me, and that is, let Nigeria announce that its citizens should get out of Ukraine. And then the next question is, to where would they go? Are you going to provide an air peace plane to evacuate them? Do you even know how many there? Have they registered with the embassy there? What about your diplomats? Should they stay on? I'm not sure if we have an embassy there or whether Ukraine is serviced from Moscow. So, everybody has now got into this state of hysteria. Now, if Putin invades Ukraine, brimstones have been threatened by the United States and its NATO allies. However, Biden made a strategic mistake at the very beginning when he took the military option off the table and started talking about economic sanctions. Before you even start a negotiation, you take one of the options off the table. It's never done in diplomacy. You should keep the other side guessing how far you are prepared to go. And I am absolutely sure that if Biden had not taken the military option off the table, by now, Putin might have said, well, it was all war games within his territory, exercises, and the boys are going back home to the barracks. But once he took the military option off the table, you had empowered Putin. And his attitude now is, how far will really these economic sanctions go without hurting Europe itself? Because don't forget that all those economic relations, all those economic factors, not only in Europe, but globally, are linked now. Look at the way the price of crude is shooting up. Thanks to this crisis. Well, it is to the benefit of a country like Nigeria and other oil-producing countries. If they are wise, they will stock up on their foreign exchange reserves. So it's not just Russia that will be hurt if there is an economic war, because that's what economic sanctions will amount to. It's going to scramble and re-scramble the economic parameters of international trade. But please forgive me, let me go back to the beginning, and maybe then you will understand why even I am baffled. You see, to Russia, Ukraine is not a foreign country. What do I mean by that? To Buhari, Niger and Chad are not really foreign countries. And that's why we could be building a railroad from Kano to go across there, because, there are personnel, nationalities, human beings, all across the border are mixed. So in the case of Ukraine and Russia have been part of this mishmash of Central European politics, believe me, by 400 AD. The Russian, what do you call it now? You have the Roman Catholic Church on the west, and then you have the Orthodox Church on the east. The Russian Orthodox Church was established by monks who left Kiev, which is now the capital of Ukraine, and went to Moscow, which was just a village at that time. So from time immemorial, Ukraine and Russia had been factors and what have you. So to the Russians, Ukraine are like ancestors. They are uncles, they are aunties. And I've listened to interviews done with even Ukrainians who said, what's this all about? In fact, we go shopping across the border, we speak Russian and this and that. So why has this thing been built up? I suspect that all this has to do with this gas pipeline, that the Americans are determined, the gas pipeline that goes from Russia to Germany, it hasn't been turned on now, but the pipe is fully laid up. It's just to give the signal and the gas will start flowing. And the Americans fear with that gas pipeline turned on, not just Germany alone, but Europe is going to get sucked into a cordial, close, intimate relationship with Russia, which will increase Russian power or influence over Europe, but diminish American influence over Europe. Therefore, if this crisis is then handled in such a way that that pipeline project is destroyed ab initio, then we go back to the status quo. I hope and I pray for all our sakes that Putin does not make the mistake of crossing that border. Because if he does, it's easy to start a war. It's not easy to end it, and you cannot even predict. All it will take is one foolish man on one side to make a mistake and send a missile where he's not supposed to send it. But, believe me, Central Europe is not going to be the same if this war starts.
Yes, sir.
Number two, you cannot separate... Yes.
You can finish, sir. You wanted to finish your point, sir?
Yes. Don't separate Ukraine from Crimea. Everyone says Russia invaded Crimea a couple of years ago, which is true. But apart from the fact that, again, Crimea has an influence in the psychic of the Russians, because it was as a war on Crimea that led it broke the Russian economy, and Russia had to sell Alaska to the United States in order to recoup its losses over a war on Crimea. So mentally, Crimea in the brains of Russians, again, it's like talking about 9/11 to the Americans. It triggers off an emotional response. And I ask you, when did Crimea become part of Ukraine? It was Khrushchev in the 60s who gave Crimea to Ukraine when the Soviet Union was still intact. And Khrushchev was the head of the Soviet Union, but he came from Ukraine. He was a Ukrainian. So he dashed them Crimea. So when Russia invaded Crimea, it was like taking back a territory that was yours originally, but that was given out of a gesture of unity by somebody else. Keep all of these things in mind and try and look at things from both sides.
Thank you for those perspectives, sir. Yes, that Nord Stream 2 geopolitical weapon is a bit of an issue. It definitely changes the calculus. But it's just been announced now by Russia's defense ministry that some of the forces that participated in the drills that really ratcheted up the tensions between Russia and the West have been pulled back and are returning to their bases. So is it too soon for us all to, heave a collective sigh of relief?
It sure does, and some of us will sleep with both eyes closed tonight. Thank you for that news. I am happy that Putin did not fall into this trap. Putin has achieved his objective. Number one, Russia has been treated as a global power. In this past 1 month, everybody had been traveling to Moscow. He'd been sitting like the last Tsar, the emperor, at the end of one table, and then the slaves had been kept, at the end of another long table. I'm being flippant, but honestly, when you look at the way he treated the French president, I mean, it was demeaning, frankly. He dominated his environment. That's what IBB will say. He dominated his environment. He picked what time the meeting will start, what time the meeting will end. He knew that Macron, president of France, was aiming to finish that meeting so he could appear on the French national news at 8 p.m. Paris time. Putin made sure that meeting overran so that Macron could not, have his ego played up by the French news item. But he's achieved it. He's achieved it. He's been made to be, if you like, the emperor of the world, with everybody, calling him on the phone, playing up to him, asking for even, there's been a movement when Macron and others start talking about new concessions, new restructuring of the European security system. Yes, we don't have the details, but Putin will remind them that you promised that we would take a look at this matter. He's achieved his objective. He doesn't need to go across that border.
Okay, Prof. So the withdrawal of the troops back to their bases, as announced by the Russian defense spokesperson this morning, can Putin be trusted? Will you say that this is a triumph for diplomacy? Now, you talked earlier about gas being at the heart of this, but the reports also indicate that Russia is insisting, it wants commitments, guarantees from the US and the West and NATO that Ukraine would not be allowed to join NATO. And nobody has given him any guarantees yet. Will he give up on that?
No, he won't give up on that. If presidents and countries start giving up on their demands, that will be the end of diplomacy and diplomats. He won't give up on that. You asked, 2 or 3 questions together. I'll lump them and then try and... now, what's the point of having guarantees when those guarantees are not kept? Number one, who is the first victim of guarantees in this process? Ukraine has been the first victim. In 1994, I suppose, when as part of the agreements and guarantees when the Soviet Union was cracking up, Ukraine was the 4th nuclear power in the world in terms of the nuclear weapons they had. Now, these were the weapons of the Soviet Union that were domiciled in Ukraine. But the Soviet Union didn't want them. And so Ukraine became a nuclear power. When it became independent, Ukraine was made to dismantle those nuclear weapons on the guarantee that its territorial integrity and independence will not be threatened. Now, see what has happened. Putin went into the Soviet part of, the Russian part of Ukraine, although not Russian troops, but he engineered, Russian speakers there, who came to Ukrainian support. All they did was to threaten economic sanctions. And the ones that were imposed by Obama were neither here nor there. Russia invaded Crimea, which was an appendage of Ukraine. Did anybody put troops on the ground to repel Russia? Of course, the talk in Washington was, are you going to bomb St. Petersburg because of Crimea and risk Washington being bombed by the Russians? No, Crimea is not worth a war with Russia. Therefore, so what's the point of Ukraine? But let that be a lesson to, I would say, medium power countries. If you have factors that empower you, don't give up those on the basis of a guarantee by anybody, because when you need those guarantees, they will not be there, just as those guarantees are not there for Ukraine. Number two, Ukraine has a critical role to play in this, and I hope that they have diplomats who have Kissinger's flair for, teasing out critical issues from supplementary issues. You see, instead of Ukraine being a factor of conflict between Russia and Europe, Ukraine can actually be a bridge of understanding between Russia and Europe. What will be the constituents of this understanding be? One, let Ukraine give a guarantee that it will not join NATO, at least for the next 10, 15 years. Let it give that guarantee. Because one of the things that Putin said, but because it was not in writing, we cannot verify, was that when the Soviet Union was on the verge of being broken up, the West gave Gorbachev an undertaking that NATO will not expand eastwards. Putin said they fooled us. Before you knew it, 14 of the former Soviet territories were incorporated into NATO. Let Ukraine give that commitment. But what will Ukraine gain from this? That NATO would then say the red line for NATO will be that Russia will not cross into Ukraine or Georgia. So that will be the give and take on both sides. That guarantees the integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. It calms down and it addresses the Russian fear of security. You may say, Russia is so big. What's all this noise about being invaded? If you are the president of Russia, that has been invaded, the last time I checked, 55 times since 430 AD. And the last invasion came by the Nazis, the Germans. You always fear invasion from Europe. America has never been invaded, so it can take a laid-back view about invasions from abroad. But 9/11 taught Americans the lesson that you could be invaded from the air. And if you know what America had then put in place just after that one incident, then you will understand, if you like, call it paranoia, the paranoia of Russians and their leaders about invasion from NATO and Western Europe. So to me, that will be the way forward. Let us put guarantees in place, written this time, not in blood, but in diplomatic green ink. And that should calm nerves, not only in Moscow, but also in Ukraine. And then, but Americans are not going to go to sleep over that gas pipeline. They will not. That gas pipeline is a challenge to American global power. Yes, on this program, I have said it, that we are witnessing a change in the world order with the ascendance of China, and Russia is going to hook onto that, and the descent of the United States, this gas pipeline will be another nail in the coffin of American power. Because, as I said earlier, it will diminish American influence in Europe. So expect another crisis over that pipe. The Germans want that pipeline to go ahead, but the Americans are determined that it wouldn't go ahead.
Well, Prof, thank you very much for joining us on the morning show and for your insights as always. Thank you very much.